Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. Real excited about tonight's topic. This is something we don't typically dive too much into, but it's something that's important. I think that we should talk about, especially for people that are interested in getting their foot in the door at certain companies and stuff like that. Whether you're a junior developer or a senior developer and stuff like that. I think it's interesting to kind of walk through and talk through these processes and stuff of how you get through the technical interview. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and hand things over to Aaron. I'm very happy to have Aaron here tonight from Atomic Robot and stuff. He's going to be doing the presentation. And with that, I'm going to hand things over. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. Let me start so I'm going to take about maybe 10 minutes, not very long, go through a few slides. It's just kind of an overview of technical interviews and kind of interviewing in general. And now the focus of this talk is mainly on the interviewee side, the person that's going to the interview. But there are some important information if you're doing the interview as well. And so let's just get started. So we're going to start here with, first of all, a little bit about me. I'm a principal consultant and software engineer at Atomic Robot. We are a consultant agency based in Cincinnati. We focus mainly on mobile development, but we do a little bit of everything. I've been a developer for 23 years, C#, TypeScript, Java, and all kinds of other things. I've got 10 or more years of mobile development, mainly in iOS, Swift, and Objective-C. I've also taught at a coding boot camp in Cincinnati for a year there, and I've also been an adjunct professor at Purdue University. So I have both classroom instruction experience as well as lots of mentoring that I've done. In my time as a boot camp instructor, we did mock interviews with all of our students. So during that time, I've done over 100 mock interviews and real interviews for various companies that I've been at. So I feel like I know a little bit about this topic, but I want to get everybody else's information tonight too. Hopefully this is going to be very interactive. I want to get other people's perspectives as well. So going into the technical interview. First of all, what is the purpose of a technical interview? There's three main things that an interviewer cares about. First of all, and most importantly, is can you do the job? They need to assess your technical skills to see if you're capable of doing the job that they have for you. What exactly this means varies by position. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But also, part number two is, will you complement the existing team? So if they have a team in place, they want to know, do you fit in with the team? Are you going to get along? Are there going to be personality conflicts that are always coming up? And do you perhaps fill a void in the team that's currently missing? And then third, and you don't think about this as much, but they also care about how much time are you going to take away from the existing team? So how much extra effort does the existing team need to do in order to get you up to speed or support you in your role? It's also important to remember that interviews are not just one way. You're not only interviewing to see if the company wants you, you're also interviewing to see if you want the company. So you should come prepared with some questions. You should have 2 or 3 prepared questions about the position and the company, not specifically about compensation or benefits. Now, you can ask about compensation and benefits at different times. 100 people will give you 100 different answers of when you should talk about that. So those are acceptable questions to ask, but you should have 2 or 3 questions in addition to the specifics of the job, the specifics of what the company provides to you. Another thing, and this is something that my HR manager told me about when I talked to her about this, was you can ask to talk to somebody that you'll be working with, which is interesting. You can ask the company to give you something as well, such as an interview with someone in a specific role. This can be great, especially if most of the people that you're interviewing with are managers or are, even, the company founders or CEO or something like that. A lot of small companies, you might be interviewing with a company founder, even though you're interviewing for a junior or mid-level position. But you can ask to talk to somebody that is that you're going to be working with, or that is at the same level as you, which is great to ask certain questions like, what do you like about this job? What do you like about this company? Would you ask your friend to work for this company? Because those are all things that are important, and the company should support you in this as well, because it doesn't help you or the company for them to hire you only for you to quit 2 months later. The company doesn't want that, and you don't want that. So make sure that you're interviewing the company as well as letting the company interview you. So the first part, can you do the job? So this is the technical part of the technical interview. The key thing here is don't be afraid to say that you don't know something, especially if you're a junior dev. Well, first of all, let me do a quick poll here. How many people here are juniors? Nobody? Mid-level, 4 to 5 years? Seniors, say 6 to 10 years? And then above senior, that would be principal or whatever other terms are used nowadays. So we have a variety. Everybody here seems to be mid-level or more, or older, more experienced, whatever you want to call that. But the more junior you are, and that could be mid-level. If you're in a mid-level position, that's more junior than a senior or a principal. The more junior you are, the less they expect you to know. So don't be afraid. If you can't answer something, the big thing is when you answer something, when you don't know the answer, they're looking for, I don't know the exact answer to that, but. They're looking for the but. They're looking for the what are you going to provide them other than a simple no. But also because that employer is trying to find the limits of what you know, because they need to know what you do know, but they also need to know what you don't know. Personally, I ask questions that I expect the person to know the answer to, and that I expect the person to not know the answer to. Now, not everybody does that. Some people just have a list of questions and say, these are the questions that we are asking everybody, and your HR person will probably tell you that that's what they do. And that's the best way to do things. A lot of HR people that have non-HR people do interviews will give you a questionnaire that says you need to fill out this questionnaire for everybody. Asking everybody the same questions makes it easier to compare people, but it can also make the conversation very rigid, and it's not as conversational. But I do usually expect to ask some questions that the person may not know the answer to. First of all, because I want to know how they're going to answer that, but also because I need to know what they don't know as much as I know what they do know. And realize that nobody knows everything. This is especially true. All of this is especially true if you're applying to a junior or even mid-level position. Part number 2 is, will you complement the existing team? And I need to close my participants list here. All right, first of all, how's everybody doing all right? Any questions, comments? Just holler if you need anything. So question number 2, will you complement the existing team? The important thing to remember here is that this is not necessarily about your technical skills. You might not get a job at a particular company, maybe one that you really want to work for, not because you lack the technical skills, but because they need somebody on that team that is different from you. That could be that they have different personality types on the team. Maybe they have a bunch of submissive personality types on the team, and they need somebody that's more commanding. Maybe they have a bunch of commanding personality types on the team, and they need somebody that's more submissive. There's no one personality type that is better or worse than any others. Yes, sir.
During an interview, would you try to figure and cater what you're capable of doing to that, or do you feel that's like too much towards not misrepresenting yourself?
So the question for everyone that's listening is, would you try to figure out what the personality type is that they want and cater to that? I would say no. And the reason is because you're not going to be happy if you're not comfortable in the position that you're in. Unless, the only time you might do that, and again, I would never recommend it, is if you know that this is a stepping stone. Or I need a job right now because I got laid off and I can't pay my rent, then maybe you would do something like that, but I wouldn't recommend it because it is dishonest to some extent. One could argue that it's dishonest, and long-term, you're not going to be happy in that role because you can't be yourself at work. Now, it is notable also that your work self and your personal self are not necessarily the same personality type, which is also very interesting. Which, side note, if you have to do a personality evaluation for a job, answer those questions based on what you would do in a professional setting, not what you're going to do when you're sitting around the table at home with your kids and wife and your best friend from college, right? You want to answer that question based on how you work at work, because that's what matters. But key thing here, if you don't get the job, it might not be because you lack technical knowledge. It might simply be because you're just not a good particular fit for this particular team. A lot of times, if that's the case, and they really like your technical knowledge and technical experience, they may say you're not a good fit for this thing, but I want to keep your resume on hand, and we may contact you if something opens up. And the recruiter in the room is shaking her head. Yeah, or sorry, nodding her head. Yes, this is all correct. So that's very, I'm glad to see that. It's also important to note that every hiring decision is based on a series of judgment calls, each of which can be technical or non-technical. I've heard, I'm reluctant to throw this particular word out there, but I've heard HR managers say every hiring decision has some amount of discrimination. It's not discrimination in you're black and you're white, or you're this and you're that, but you're discriminating on some factor. That factor could be technical skills. That factor could be whether you fit in with the team, but it's some sort of discrimination, right? Just like when you choose your friends, you discriminate from people that are not like you or people that annoy you. So discrimination in this particular case is not about politically correct discrimination here. But
right more along the lines of numbers, like if they have 5 applicants, they're applying for one job, they're going to have to discriminate against 4 people.
Exactly. And that's the point. Another point is most of the time, managers hire based on your technical skills, but they fire based on your attitude. You can get that job if you have great technical skills, but if nobody wants to work with you, you're not going to keep the job for very long. Because not being a team player makes nobody like working with you. And if people don't like working with you, you're not going to be there very long. So, questions on that? Moving on. This is more for the people that are doing the interviewing, but also if you are being interviewed, there are certain things that an interviewer are not legally allowed to ask you. Things about age, marital status, number of children, race, gender, religious beliefs, disability, unemployment status. Talking to my HR rep before we did this, before I went over all of this with her to make sure that I wasn't saying anything illegal or anything that was against what Atomic Robot would generally do. I also learned that gender identity is also now a Title VII, I think, protected class. So you also cannot base your hiring decisions based on gender identity. Bad questions are things like, do you attend a local church? Are you a US citizen? Now that one seems interesting, right? You can't ask if I'm a US citizen. No, you can't, but you can ask, are you legally allowed to work in the United States? Those are two different questions. David, did you have a question?
Well, I was going to say that there's a lot of variability on the resident status because, like, for instance, a lot of people I work with, they're not U.S. citizens, but they either they're working here on H-1B visa or they have a green card. They have some different type of work status that allows them to work in the United States.
Yep, and that's why you can ask, are you legally allowed to work in the United States? Also, you can ask, would you need, what's the right word? Sponsorship. Would you need sponsorship to work here, to work in the United States? So those are all legal questions because that's actually related to the hiring process, but you can't ask, are you a US citizen? What's your ethnicity? Do you have a lot of credit card debt? Things like that.
So then tell me how you got this scar. I feel like I could mistakenly have done, I've interviewed people, but that's never come up, but it just seems wicked.
But if somebody has a scar, like right over their
I
eye,
would
you're
have
like,
thought that that would be out
And-
of bounds.
and basically it's not related to the job.
Okay.
So it doesn't, you would probably learn how they got that scar after they got hired. But if you ask about it, then they could claim that you discriminated based on that. If I asked about your scar and you told me that you got it because you were drunk and jumped off a bridge, and man, it was so awesome because I was drunk and high at the same time. And boy, I just saw that water coming out, whatever. I'm gonna have a hard time not discriminating against you because of your bad judgment.
Can you ask about drugs?
No.
I would say no. I think there's a lot of things that seems, like innocent. You're just asking it. We've had some people like, oh, I was talking about my kids. I saw the kids' picture and I asked them, and this conversation.
Right.
There's a lot of things that, again, could be fun. If someone brought it up, I would share it, but somebody else could take it. If I didn't get the job, but because my daughter,
Right.
that I'm going to have to take her. There's a lot of things that seem innocent or funny or whatever that could be taken totally different ways.
So here's a question related to that. I'm going to ask you, if that's all right. So a lot of companies, for example, I'm not sure Daily does this or not, but a lot of companies, when you were applying for a job, they require you to do a drug test. As an example, I don't know if they'll.
So a question you could ask is, this job will require you to do regular drug testing. Will that be a problem for you?
I once got a job and the manager asked me if I could take a drug test if I needed to step.
Wait, was that in bounds?
I didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I once worked for a company that I was talking to the CEO, and the CEO specifically told me, we will never drug test our people because too many people would fail. And I'm like, you, the CEO, is telling me this. Okay, great. So there's things that you can't talk about.
When you started interviewing, did they give you this list? Because I interviewed some people and I didn't talk about any of these things, but it would have been nice to have a list.
I've never been given direct guidance on what I can and cannot ask in an interview. I looked this up for this call. There are, so I started doing actual real technical interviews when I worked for a company called Sagetti, which is their large company, Capgemini now, I think. Basically my managers called and said, hey, will you call this guy at this time on this date and give him a tech interview? I'm like, sure. Here's the questionnaire you're gonna have to fill out about him afterwards. Whether they still do that or not, I don't know. But I've never been given any particular training. My dad is a management coach and works as an HR coach all over the US, mainly for small businesses and farms and things like that. So I was kind of raised by an HR person and have picked up on a lot of things and know also what to look up. The reason that I chose a technical interview here is because there's a lot of information on the web on how to do any other kind of interview, but it's harder to find information about tech interviews. So one caveat to this, what you can't ask, as the interviewee, if you are being interviewed, if there's something that you want the company to know about that they can't ask you about, you can offer that information. Depending on who you talk to, different HR people have different opinions, but some HR people will tell you that once you bring it up, they can talk about it. Others will say you really shouldn't still. An example for why this might be the case, why you might want to do this. So I worked at, so when I was in Cincinnati, I have worked for P&G as a client a number of times. P&G has a huge LGBT ally program. They are very proud of it. They are a big supporter of the Pride Parade in Cincinnati every year. And so they're all in on LGBT ally stuff. If you were applying there and you were non-binary or whatever, then it might be in your best interest to say, one of the reasons that I really like, that I'm really excited about potentially working for P&G is because of their great ally program. And as someone who identifies as whatever, that really would make me feel safe. You're not only you're giving them some information that they can use for or against you, but you're giving them some information that they can't ask about. I can tell you that for P&G, it probably is a bonus. That particular thing would probably be a bonus. I actually was, anyway, I'm not going to go into detail there. Other things is if you're an older gentleman or lady and you're concerned that they might discriminate against you based on your age, because maybe you're 50-ish and they're concerned that you're going to retire in 5 to 10 years. You can bring up, I'm really excited to work here, and I really think that you guys are going to help me with my 20-year goal of being a people manager in 15 years or something like that, so you can bring up some things that they can't ask about, especially if you think it's going to alleviate some of their concerns. But HR has their own way of asking about that. They can't ask you how old you are, but they can ask you about your 5, 10, and 15-year plans. And if you say that my 5-year plan is to be retired, then they likely will hire someone younger that will be around longer, because it's expensive to hire somebody and expensive to replace you due to turnover. Questions so far? Yep.
Some of them might acknowledge it and then not bring it up again.
Yep.
Which is, I do the right thing to do, right? So it's whatever, but don't take it the wrong way if they just say, okay, and then change something. If they can dive in, they can have the conversation, but if that's the direction that it goes in, again.
Yep.
I always bring up the fact that I have 4 kids. So like I can't work.
I bring up the fact that I have 7. Yeah.
And that's never been a problem. And
No.
honestly, if it was a problem, I don't.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why you might bring it up. And it's Paul, right? Paul made a great point here. If me having to take time off in the evenings and weekends for my kids and my family is going to be a problem working for this company, I don't want to work for that company. So that's another reason why you might disclose that. Paul was talking about he's got 4 kids. I have 7 kids. And my 7 kids are all involved in Irish dance. I'm at an Irish dance competition 8 weekends out of the year. One or 2 a month, usually, something like that. And I got to take some time off for that. That is not negotiable, stuff like that. All right. finally, the third point, and this is taking a lot longer than that 10 minutes that I anticipated, but how much extra effort will the existing team need to do to support you? This is usually a bigger deal like for juniors, because junior developers need a lot of support. We all know it. Everybody, like you guys are all mid or higher, you all know that junior developers need a lot of support. And companies are willing to hire those junior developers because, first of all, they cost less. Your bill rates, they're usually more profitable. If you're a consultant agency, at least, they're usually more profitable because your bill rates aren't low enough compared to their compensation package. But it also means that they can build up that junior developer into a mid-level and senior developer that is going to be great for their particular company. That, of course, also relies on the company providing compensation and keeping them there and not letting them just jump ship because they can get a raise somewhere else. However, this is also relevant to everybody else. An example here might be, let's say I have 20 years of experience in IT in construction. I've worked for the same company that does construction, and I've been on their IT team for 20 years. And now I'm going to change, and I'm looking for a job in insurance. Well, that financial company is going to have to train me not only on their systems, but also on the financial sector and all of the security that probably the contractors don't care as much about as the people that deal with finances. So they're going to take into account all kinds of stuff, not just your coding technical knowledge. Finally, we'll talk a minute about the coding exercise. So a lot of tech interviews, and this has changed over the years. So a lot of times in a tech interview, they'll have you do a whiteboard coding exercise. If it's in person, they might have you do a pair programming Zoom call with one of their developers or two of their developers or something like that. The key thing here is that it's not about the specific solution you come up with. It's about how you solve the problem, and even more, how you work with them to solve the problem. So sometimes that exercise is vague on purpose because they want you to ask questions to clarify what's going on. So you can ask for clarification. They want to know not only how do you solve the problem, but also how do you interact with them to solve the problem. One of the benefits here, though, is that you can direct that toward your strong suits. No process is always the best. Talk about the different options and why you chose a specific one to move forward. Show flexibility in your solution and show confidence in your solution. Don't worry about the syntax, worry about the pseudocode and the logic. Solve the problem logically, and then discuss the actual code once you have the problem figured out. Usually a good way to do that is to write everything in comments first, and then come back and fill in the code. And that's all the slides. So how's everybody feel about that so far? Questions, comments, discussion?
Yeah, so my question would be on preparing for the technical interview from a knowledge standpoint. So I went through this myself about a year ago because I had to switch jobs about a year ago, and I interviewed at 3 different companies, and I got an offer from 2 of them, and I got declined by one of them after the technical interview. And so the one that I was declined from is the one that I've had they did I didn't do one technical interview, I did several technical interviews. And one of the technical interviews had concern doing front end React, right? And I've done some React mainly on mobile, like React Native, but I hadn't done a lot of front end React, stuff like that. So that was probably the stuff I was like weakest on. But that one was done where it was done like over Zoom, where it was like pair programming with two developers from that company, stuff like that. But I was just going to ask, like, as far as like preparing for, what are your recommendations as far as like, what do you need to study up on when you're going to apply for XYZ job?
So typically the job description will give you some insight into what their tech stack is. Consulting is a little different because you could be doing anything, right? You might be doing React, you might be doing C#, you might be doing Ruby, you might be doing something else, right? And you might be doing something different every week, right? So consulting is a little different, but in a regular FTE, full-time equivalency kind of a job, look at their tech stack and brush up on the terminology that's used there and those particular technologies is really all I can say. It also depends on the level that you're at. Now, David, obviously you're a principal level, at least senior, post-senior level. So generally, when you're hiring the senior and principal levels, you're not looking at, can they write C#? Can they write Ruby? Can they write whatever? They're looking for, can you learn? And I have that on my resume as, look at these 32 languages that I've worked in, right? Look at these, I've done C#, Java, Python. I hate Python, but I've done it. I've done 4 different databases. I've done, and basically I just throw all of this experience at them, not because I want them to know that I have experience in these specific items, but because I want them to know that I can learn anything. I have very little that I'm concerned about whether I can learn it or not. But it may take me, I would generally say in that kind of a thing, I would probably say React Native or React front end isn't my strong point. It's not something that I have a lot of experience with right now. As you can see on my resume, I've worked with these other technologies most recently. I've done React Native. I know there's similarities there. However, I have a lot of confidence, and if you look at my resume, you can see I have a lot of confidence that I can be up and running in your tech stack within 2 weeks.
So I think I would add to this. I had an interview that turned out to be, I was interviewing the person and it didn't go well. And we were asking about front end questions, and I would ask about, do you know anything about testing? Do you know anything about CSS? Do you know anything about React? And as I got further down, I would repeatedly get, I don't know that, my company never taught me that, I don't know that, my company never taught me. And I just switched topics. And I think like one of the important things you said there was however, and you said like I can learn it in 2 weeks, but I think another however is good in like you could say, but I can give it a try and I can do the best that I can to answer that question, because from that interview it seemed like the person was just giving up on the question.
Right.
And it was putting me
You
in that
never
position.
want to give up on a question. Right. You usual, like if you're asked a question, so Paul, I'm gonna pick on you for a minute. All right. Tell me about DAOs.
DAOs?
DAOs.
Data access objects?
Yes.
Well, so like back in the old days before ORMs and stuff, a lot of companies, particularly Java, J2E tech stacks, would have like DAO layer in their like end-tiered architecture, and that would be kind of like how you would go from a code level to a database level.
All right. Are you familiar with DTOs?
Yes, I am. What does the T stand for?
Transfer.
Data transfer objects. Yep.
Okay, so what I just did here, right? So I asked Paul about DAOs, and DAOs and DTOs are effectively the same thing, right? But I think Java uses DAOs and C# uses DTOs or something like that. They're very similar, but the terminology is slightly different. I was hoping that you didn't know one of those. But usually, so let's say I ask about DAOs. And if you've never heard the term DAO before, because you work with data transfer objects or something different, or you've always worked with Hibernate or something like that, right? Then you could say, well, what is I'm not familiar with that particular term. Could you tell me what DAO stands for? Well, DAO means data access object. I don't have a lot of experience with data access objects. However, in Ruby, I've done a lot of data work where we've communicated with the database. I know nothing about Ruby, so I can't really talk about that. But, or we use data transfer objects and they do this. So you get it into a topic that you're familiar with, and then you control the interview, not them. Because you've just changed the subject to something you know about, and then you're talking about what you know about. But you have to be able, like, you still have to know something about making that transition. So back to your question real quick, David, in a more junior level, they do care a lot more about, do you know the syntax? Do you know this specific language? Do you know whatever? Also, if they're hiring for a specific role, like a consulting agency is hiring for a specific role where they need expertise in a specific area, if you don't have that expertise, you're out of luck, because they want somebody that can hit the ground running in that technology yesterday. But as a general rule, especially in consulting, that's where most of my experiences is in, which is why I can talk about that a little more. But most of the time in consulting, they want general knowledge of a lot of things and deep knowledge of a couple of things. Other comments, questions?
A lot of times we, interviewing candidates, sometimes you ask a simple question, expecting a simple answer, and the candidate wouldn't shut up about talking about like in circles. So maybe it advise like somebody's looking for this perfect interview,
Right.
About how brief the answers should be good.
So one of the things you want to become good at is reading the room.
The old now Teams or Zoom or whatever. We don't even do videos. Like the candidates would do video, and I don't think they would want to watch me. Well, because I walk. When I talk, I have to walk. I don't know why. So
yeah,
it would be all motion.
Yeah.
So,
it's completely acceptable when you're answering that question, a question, to say, I could talk about this more after, a minute or so. When you start to feel like you're monologuing, and as somebody who's done a lot of classroom instruction, I do a lot of monologuing. I'm trying to fix that. But if you catch yourself monologuing or repeating yourself or talking in circles, just stop and say, I have more that I could talk about this. If you want to keep talking about this, or would you like to direct the conversation somewhere specific?
So I think this is interesting as well. I've seen interviews, maybe I've even been in these interviews, being interviewed, where they asked a question and it's just going poorly. And I'm floundering and I'm trying to keep answering this question. And sometimes I'm like, obviously I don't know this in the, in the aspect of time, should we go on another question?
So
just kind of save the interview because.
So you should start by saying, that's not something I have a lot of experience with. I can talk about this other thing, which I think is related, if you'd like to go in that direction. So again, kind of taking some control of the interview yourself and directing it. But if you're floundering, you messed up already. Kind of, because you shouldn't be to that point. If you're floundering, you're either rambling because you got to the end of what you had to say and you're still talking because you feel like you need to talk, or you never really should have started talking to begin with, beyond that's not something I have a lot of experience with, but something.
So I was just thinking of a good analogy to this. So anybody that's gone to get a pilot's license, an example, you have to get what's called an oral exam from a DPE, designated pilot exam. And the DPE, one of the things that they will do is, this is a trick they use with flight students, is, they'll ask them a question about one specific subject, and then if the student starts going on and on, monologuing, so to speak, they start talking about something that may be, related, but starting to get into a different subject. So, oh, well, let me ask you about that. And then they start looking for things that they can tell you on, right? So, one of the things I was always taught with the DPEs, it's like, just give them the information for the question that they're asking. And then if they ask you for something that's related, then you can answer that. But that's always the advice I got with the DPE. I'm assuming that would be something similar to you.
Yeah, I think it would be similar. You can also give an overview. Again, if I'm asking about, I'm going to say DAOs again, right? If I'm asked a question about DAOs, say data access objects, that's what you use to it's kind of the central layer between your application and the database. You write some objects that talk to the database. It's got some SQL in it. It's returning objects instead of returning strings. I can talk more about this if you want, but that's the general overview of what that is. So you start with kind of an overview. This is a short, concise answer to what you're looking for, and then you can ask, would you like me to talk more about that? If you can.
I get that.
Yeah.
I mean, just one last thing is that, so like that aviator thing, right? What if the person actually knows that info? Or what if I've been asked 6 CSS questions on an interview, and I'm answering these questions and I get another CSS question, like, is it a bad move to say, for the purpose of this interview, do you want to move on past CSS or keep going with CSS? And you can keep answering about that CSS.
If they're asking you about CSS, they may have a list of questions. It may be 100 questions long that they are asking every single candidate. And it's possible that the person that's asking those questions is an HR person and not a technical person.
I just bring it up because I've been an interviewer and I've done bad interviews where I just kept asking about a certain subject and wasn't smart enough.
As the interviewer, if you're confident that they have a lot of experience in this area, and you're like, if I'm rating them in CSS and I know on a scale of 10 that they're an 8 and we only need a 4, then you've checked that box. You don't need to keep asking them about it, basically. But it kind of it always depends on your specific situation. I also want to make sure, I think I've said this, but if I haven't said it, always, always, always follow the guidance of your HR department.
As an interviewer?
As somebody who is doing the interviewing, yes. As the interviewer, if you have an interview that you have to do and you've not done an interview before, or you've not been trained on an interview before, or you're not certain, or you've given bad interviews before, talk to your HR department. They want to talk to you about this. And also the HR department is not your enemy. A lot of people are very reluctant to talk to HR about anything. I realize that there's a lot of corporations that have some awful HR departments, and you find people that are like, HR, they're just out, they just want to help the company. They don't care about you, and they're going to screw you over anytime they can. Those HR departments exist. But if you're at a company that has less than 500 employees, that's not one. As a general rule. Yeah.
You want to go?
I could say the other point, so you go ahead.
So, yeah, you were talking about this kind of like, sounds like junior mid-level. So what about the upper levels? Like, would that interview go in a different way in terms like, can you be cocky on the interview? Like, if somebody would ask me questions, that are really basic, I might really answer like, hey, is it something you expect from me doing day to day? And then say like, well, it's not for me, and just drop the phone at this point, because it's obviously not going the way I would want it to go. So,
Patrick Lencioni has some great books. You're probably familiar with them. One of them is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. One of them is The Ideal Team Player. Both of those books are talking about teamwork within a team. It's not about technology. It's not about construction or anything at all. The premise of the books, which I agree with, is that every company will work better if all of the people on the team can work within a team. The book, The Ideal Team Player, says that everyone that you hire should be humble, hungry, and smart. Humble is exactly that. It's humble. If I have too big of an ego, I can't help the rest of the team, and everybody's going to hate me. They're not going to want to work with me. They won't necessarily hate me, but they don't want to work with me because I'm an asshole. You know, hungry means that I want to better myself. I don't want to sit on my butt and just collect a paycheck and do the same thing every day. I want to grow personally and professionally. Smart is not about being intelligent. It's about being emotionally intelligent. It's more about emotional quotient, EQ, instead of IQ. And can you go into a room and kind of read when I've insulted people? You know, can I know? Can I communicate effectively? And so, since you just said, you know, do I want to be cocky? No, you never want to be cocky in an interview because they don't want that person on their team. That's this second.
I've heard of a situation like this where like they were interviewing for a principal position, but the person interviewing them was like way junior to them. And yeah, it's just like, and they wanted a particular solution and that wasn't the right solution. It was just like, I was like, that sounds like a difficult interview. Like, and he ended up saying like, this job is not for me. He like, I don't know if he ended early, but he, yeah.
Like the people doing the interviewing were more junior to him.
Because it's kind of hard to interview at that high level.
Right, and so in that case, you still don't want to be cocky.
Right,
Right.
and some of that is he's gonna be working with you.
Right.
Junior to you, so.
Exactly,
Are you
and
gonna be able to work with him?
exactly, and consider that if you've got, let's say you have a small startup, they hired somebody, an IT person, maybe it was their cousin or whatever, who knows how to program, and he started the app. And the app's gotten great sales and now it's exploding. They recognize that he is not the best person because he doesn't have 20 years of experience. He's got 7. And they need somebody that has more experience in that, but they don't have somebody else that can actually interview somebody on a technical level. So he's going to be interviewing that person. He's not going to know the questions to ask because he doesn't have the experience to know that. Theoretically, in that kind of a situation, they would also put one of, you know, an HR person that knows more about the role and stuff in that interview, but that could just be kind of a bad situation all around. But just because you're being interviewed by junior people or you have a poor interviewer doesn't mean that you can't still do a good job in the interview. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to enjoy that role because most likely you're probably not going to be that person's subordinate, at least not for long.
But are there any instances where the company would look for a replacement for the person who is interviewing? That they're not happy with the person?
I mean, that
As you
happens.
say, nobody, else could interview at the same level, and then, maybe just kind of, if you feel that that's the situation there, like, so if they only need one, I don't know, CTO, and there's CTO.
Well, but the reason they may be doing that is because that CTO has already told them that they accepted a position that they're going to be taking in 6 months.
Okay, yeah.
I have actually been in this situation a couple of times.
Where you're interviewing your replacement, or you're interviewing with the.
Interviewing with somebody who didn't know that they would be replaced.
Ah.
That was wrong. There was another situation like what Mike was describing, where I was
Mhm.
company. There was no one that worked there. Like I was gonna report to the CEO
Mhm.
and you know, be sort of floating and helping lots of different teams. And it was actually really interesting. I had interviews with a bunch of developers at all different levels that they had worked with. And there was one particular interview where the interviewer, he was kind of like a junior. And he was asking me those questions about DNS. And it was very obvious to me that he didn't understand DNS. But that was okay.
Right.
And like through that whole thing, kind of like what you were saying, you know, I was sort of like leading him because I knew where he wanted to go.
Mhm.
So I was kind of leading him in that direction and sort of educating him on some of the stuff he was asking me about.
Mhm.
It went really well. They offered me the job.
That's really why he was on the interview, though. You're coming in as an architect to see how you would take that conversation and go down.
Yeah.
They'll do that, especially in a panel interview. You're gonna have people most likely at different levels that you'll be interacting with. They want to see how you can communicate, especially at that level, kind of get them to where they need to go.
But they wouldn't tell them to ask about DNS, you know, with like inadequate, like just with the intent to learn from, like, that just was a happy.
Yeah, in this case,
I'm-
like.
I'm looking at her face saying,
We had-
So that's an idea.
We had these ones the dinner we sit in.
So like
be
play dumb,
surprised.
play dumb with this guy, and let's
Yeah.
see what happens.
No, I mean, it could be because that was a knowledge gap on the team. It could be something else. It could be he was filling in for somebody else and was like, oh, I'll ask the questions. I know we need to ask it and see where he takes it. So I think it comes down to preparing the panels. That's one thing, but,
Are there any tells depending who is interviewing you, like for the higher positions, you know, what the mood should be, you know, what, like, as you say, like, oh, I'm so humble, just like, thank you for seeing me, or just like, hey, I'm here to solve your problems, let's talk, you know, what we can do together kind of deal.
I would say always treat them as your equal. It doesn't matter whether they're a CIO, a CEO, or a junior developer. They are your equal. They will be a coworker, they will be a peer of yours. And that goes with the humble part of the humble, hungry, and smart is if you're going to look down on somebody because they're a junior developer or because they're a maid or because they're a janitor or because they're or because they're a construction worker or because they're a junior or a mid or a less experienced developer than you, you don't fit that requirement. If you're going to treat the CEO better because he's the CEO, you also don't meet that requirement.
So say you're in a panel interview though.
Yep.
And you have the owner of the company, the manager that you're gonna be working with, the
Mhm.
developer on the team, maybe 3 people. You know, you had mentioned like read the temperature in the room.
Mhm.
I mean, I think I lean towards like trying to figure out what they want. And so the developer has a very different question that he wants to ask, and I need to make him happy.
Right.
And then I need to see like what, you know, the CEO is looking for and find a way to say that I'm fit for that. And then I
Right.
need to look at the manager.
I can tell you most likely the reason those 3 people are in the room are because they want the CEO wants to know how you talk to the IT person. The IT person wants to know if you have the IT knowledge needed. And what was the other person?
Manager.
Like a manager, you know, wants to know whether you fit on the team. And every answer matters to all 3 of them.
So that's
The specific data that you present in each answer may not matter to all 3 of them. Right? The CEO who doesn't know how to write a line of code doesn't care that you explained that an HTTP request goes through a DNS and then, you know, whatever, and it's a stateless protocol and all of that. He doesn't care about all of that, but he does care that you're not talking down to this developer who's going to be a junior on your team.
So answer it in a way that you think would make all parties happy.
Into the.
So-
Like I can't go deep dive with the developer unless like I ask permission to go deeper.
Well, I mean,
because they're being bored out of their minds.
but even that can be here's my brief overview of that answer. Would you like me to go into more detail? I don't want to bore these other guys, you know.
Yeah.
But you also don't know that CEO isn't a coder. Yeah, you know. So I'm gonna stop our questions just for a minute because there's a couple of things I want to make sure that we cover. David, what time are we officially over here? Is it 7:30 or 8? Or just whenever we're done?
It's usually goes either for an hour or 2 hour and a half.
Okay, all right. So the first question you are most likely to be asked in any interview, including a technical interview. Can anyone tell me what that is? Anyone? Yep.
Tell me about yourself.
Tell me about yourself. Yes, and I heard of somebody groan over here, right? Okay, so I'm gonna pick on you in the back corner there. Sorry, what's your name? Kunal? Yeah. So Kunal, tell me about yourself.
I'm a software engineer with roughly 15 years of professional experience. I was interested in code before that. You know, I think I like what I do. I find it much more stimulating.
You're hired.
So I'm gonna pick on you, Kunal, a little bit. First of all, I asked you about yourself and you did a lot of hesitating. Do you know yourself? I assume you do, right? You want to be able to, you're going to be asked that question, right? I guess everybody didn't raise their hand and say, but the HR person said, this is the first question you're going to be asked. And it was the exact same question that I knew that she was going to say.
Follow-up.
What's that?
I didn't expect a follow-up. That kind of, like, okay, we're gonna twist the knife, okay?
No, you need to be able. Yeah.
Sorry, so that question, what does it entail? About your professional experience or about your personal? Because I guess
Yes.
it's confused, because if I've heard it like that, if I have to,
Right.
what do I say, you know?
And
You ain't a guy.
And I'm gonna get there. So the way I would normally answer this question, I'd love your everybody's appraisal, would be something like, so I've been a software developer for over 20 years. I've always had an interest in mobile. I've done about 7 to 8 years of mobile experience, but that goes all the way back to when I was in college and I started doing mobile development then, way back on an iPac, if you remember that thing, using the .NET Compact framework. And over the years, I've done a lot of full stack development and worked at a number of different companies. Most recently, I've been consulting for the last 10 years or so, apart from some classroom teaching that I've done. In my free time, I like to spend time with my family and play board games.
So the intro to your presentation, similar to that.
Basically, how was that?
Sounds good. You checked on a lot of the boxes, and I think the confidence in that answer is very big, because again, they might not say, tell me about yourself, but they're gonna say, tell me about your experience, or tell me about this. And if they want to know specifically about your current work experience, they're gonna ask because they read your resume before you've interviewed, right? If they haven't, we're planning on them. If you guys are interviewing, read your resumes at that time. But I think you're hitting on what you've done, your passion behind what you do, and then you touched a little bit about your personal life. But again, you're gonna get to know people on a personal level a little bit during the interview, but that's really gonna come after they're hired. So if if you want to keep talking about your kids and everything,
So-
you're gonna know I keep talking about that.
Right, but I usually like to give, this is what I've done, this is what I'm interested in, this is why I do it, which I didn't really talk too much on, and this is what my most recent experience is. I like to add something a little personal at the end. In my free time, I like to spend time with my family, with my wife and 7 kids, and I like to play board games. I have other things that I like to do too, but I'm not going to talk for 5 minutes on what I like to do outside of work. But I've added a little bit of personality. Also, interestingly, there's a lot of people in IT that play board games. And sometimes just bringing up a common hobby means you fit in the team. At Atomic Robot, we have 25 employees or so, approximately 25 employees, and we have probably 8 of those people are woodworkers. 7 or 8 of them play video games regularly. 3 or 4 bake or cook. More than half are into specialty coffee and whiskey. Not necessarily the same more than half. But if I were interviewing, and probably 3/4 are into board games, right? If I were interviewing with them, I've made an instant connection with whoever's hiring me. Because I happen to bring up something that I do indeed enjoy doing. You have to be sincere here, because they're gonna see through, like, if I say, how many people here are board gamers? Anybody?
I started.
Wow. Okay, this is
So
surprising.
you have to pick the most common kind of hobby, and that way you just kind of
Or-
cover as much as possible. Like,
What if
oh,
I
I'm
have a-
into food or something.
What if I have a referral who knows I'm a cycler and he's like, hey, the team that's hiring you, they all are into cycling. It's like, okay, that's the one I'm gonna talk
Then
about.
that's the one you would talk, then that's the one that you would mention, literally, because it's true. Like, it's important that if you're gonna bring something up like that, it has to be sincere and it has to be true. Because I could say, and in my free time, I like to play board games, and they're like, oh, really, what's your favorite board game? I could be, wow, I don't know how many are my favorites. Like, I don't know what's my favorite, but recently I've really enjoyed this, and this, right? But if I don't know a board game that's not Monopoly or Sorry or Candyland, now I've just lied to them and they know
Hey now, Candyland goes hard.
it.
It's the only board game where the outcome is predetermined.
It is a game where the outcome is predetermined.
As soon as you shuffle the cards, the outcome of the game.
I don't know if it's the only one, but yes, it definitely
Well,
is.
Yeah, that might be hyperbole, but I don't know.
What if you
What
can get someone to quit?
And yet it's still more exciting than Hi-Ho Cheerio. Anyway, it's a kid's game. You buy it, you spin a spinner and collect cherries, and that's it.
I like the game Garage. It's a fun game.
I'm not familiar with that one. Anyway, now we're getting off topic, which could happen in your interview, and when they only have an hour, that might not be a bad thing. So,
To get off topic,
to talk about what they enjoy doing, because you're actually making an emotional connection with this person. They still need to know, can you do the job? But if they want you on the team because they like you, that is going to make up for a lot.
but is it
Of-
hierarchical? Like, you have to prove you can do the job. You said that was like the number one thing. And then the follow-ups, like number 3 was they get along with you.
So, well, number 2 is how well do you fit in the team? However, if they have 50 candidates, 30 of them are competent to do the job. Right? About that?
You're optimistic.
Well, meet the minimum technical requirements. Now, if you're the more senior you get, the fewer that pool is. And you're going to have junior developers that interview for or that apply for a principal position, and you're looking at that and saying, you're 3 years out of college or right out of college. You're not gonna get this job. I'm not even gonna interview you. But I can probably know in about 15 minutes, just talking to you, whether you're technically competent to learn what I need you to learn.
And if you're the interviewer and you start, like, this summary was perfect because that was like a minute, maybe, right? Because you want to be mindful of how much time, because if you get on an interview and you're the interviewee and you're spending 15 minutes giving a summary of your experience,
Mhm.
you've lost people on the panel,
Right.
right? Because they don't know when to interject, they don't know that. But if you think about it, you give your summary and then they start probing about board games, they start probing about this. They're the ones technically running the interview, right? I mean, you guys might navigate it together, but they're gonna know what they need to get out of that hour-long interview. And if they want to spend 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes talking about a board game and then 10 minutes talking about the technical stuff,
That's on them.
worst case, you might have to have follow-up, but they should know. You should, and we encourage people to do time checks and set expectations at the beginning of the interview, like especially 30-minute interviews, we've got 30 minutes. So that's another segue to kind of somebody off, but if they're very long, we can say, hey, just want to do a time check. We've got this
Yep.
amount of time, I want to make sure that you're all the content.
And so that tell me about yourself question. I'm sorry to be harsh on you there, but tell me about yourself question should be 60 to 90 seconds. And that's it. You don't have to bring up anything personal if you don't want to. If you don't want to say that you have kids, don't say it. If you don't want to say that you do anything outside of work, don't say it. If you're a person that likes to keep work and personal life completely separate, that's perfectly fine. Just don't bring up anything personal in the interview. But that tell me about yourself. It is surprisingly the question that most people have the most trouble with. And it's talking about yourself, which is why it's so surprising. Yeah. So any questions on that? Yeah.
Related. So what would be the trick? Because usually what happens, someone trying to fill a position, there's multiple candidates go, let's trust you with, is like 3/5 of them will have technical skills to pass the technical part of it. So then the panel or hiring manager will have to make a decision. And, I've been on that side and usually when we post a position, you'll have back-to-back schedule for 3 days. You see, talk to 6 people, maybe sometimes more. Some of them, yes, you just 15 minutes into the conversation, I just message, I'm done here to my manager, and we just wrap it up. So it doesn't make sense.
Right.
You torturing the person. Some of them who go through, then at the end of the, sometimes we right away, we just talk about what they feel about them, and maybe I hope manager makes notes because I commit them to my memory and forget right away. But later on, he's like, so okay, who do we want to hire after all those 6 people? And usually you would remember people by some tiniest things, you don't remember this whole life story or experience or how good they were answering questions. Usually it would be some kind of thing that you would remember and you say oh, the hustler guy, let's get him.
Right.
Because he gave this impression when he didn't know stuff, he was hustling, and it's okay, if you can do it the job and get the stuff done, who cares?
So generally,
are there any tricks to plant this impression where people will come back and have this oh, that's the guy, kind of.
So the key word there is you're asking for tricks, and there aren't any. Right? And if you're trying to hack the interview, the interviewer is going to know it because they're smarter than you think. And they're going to see through it. They just are. The best way to get the job, a job that you want and that they want you to stay there, is to be yourself in the interview. Don't try to do anything special. Don't try to be anybody different. Don't try to trick them into anything, right? But when I do interviews and we're chatting on Slack after the interview, usually it's, what did you think of this guy? I liked it. And that's it. I think we should give him a chance. Or I had some concerns here and here, but overall I think he's going to be a great fit for the team, and I think he can learn those things. That's usually the kind of thing. Or just I don't think he's going to be a good fit for the team. I think he has a lot of knowledge, but man, he's arrogant. Or he doesn't have the technical skills that we need on the team. And that's usually what that follow-up conversation is. Now, maybe HR requires that one of the more senior, one of the founders on that team fills out an actual form so that when you tell them why you're not hiring them, they can't sue you. But because you have to have some sort of legal basis for why you chose this person over someone else. But again, there's a lot of reasons that you might choose or not choose somebody. If you're in a scenario where they're doing back-to-back interviews, the most thing you can do is be memorable. But you want to be memorable, first of all, for a good thing. And secondly, if you can be memorable for your energy and for your technical skills and your energy, really, those are the key things. I'm excited about this job. I'm excited about this position. I'm excited about working specifically for you. Not just I'm excited to have a job. right? But I'm excited to work specifically for you. In these days of quiet quitting and people not wanting to go above and beyond, but they still want to get the pay increases and they still want to get the title increases and they still want to get the promotions, even though they're not willing to put in more than minimal effort. Well, nobody wants to hire that person. And there's a lot of them available, which goes back to the people hire based on technical skills and fire based on attitude. Right?
Is
Yep.
personality, is energy a personality trait?
No.
So it's attitude.
The personality traits are like introverted and extroverted.
Okay.
And extroverted people may appear to have more energy, but you can be just as excited about a position and be an introvert. And the interviewer should be able to see the energy, even though you're not fueled by having more bodies in the room.
You could argue energy and engagement. You know,
Engagement might be a better term than energy, but yeah, so
And
you
you show engagement by presenting yourself at the interview, or you show it through the history of your employment with, you're like, oh, what did you do at your last position? It's like, oh, well, I was tasked with this task and that's how I approach it. Like,
I would say, first of all, if they're asking you, what did you do with the last in your last position while they're holding your resume, that interviewer needs some training.
Well, honestly, all the resumes are completely a mess when we get. I scan through them. Sometimes they're person wrote it. Sometimes it's machine generated bullshit. And I just like, okay, probably the candidate was forced by HR person, or not HR, but like staffing agency to
right.
go with this for some reason. So what's the point? I'm not gonna even ask them because I know how it works on the other side. I'm not gonna say, oh, did you write your resume? Because it's like a lot of mistakes in them. Obviously they didn't. It's like any little bit of grammar would not make those kind of abruptly stop the sentence and start with a small letter like.
You would be surprised. You would be surprised. And I mean, frankly, that's what I look for in a resume. I look at resumes and I look for mistakes. Now, if I got something that was a mass produced, obviously this came from a staffing agency or something like that, then I probably wouldn't care as much. But
you already have a person.
But if I actually have a resume, usually that resume was given to me at least 10 minutes before the interview. So I have time to actually look through it. And I'm actually looking for mistakes in the resume. And the reason for that is because being a programmer requires extreme attention to detail. And if you can't see on your own resume that you have a grammatical error and English is your first language.
The person is not doing the resume.
Well, in your case, they're not doing the resume. But almost every resume that I've looked at is obviously a Word or a PDF document that was presented to me by this person directly, or it was given to me by the HR person who, I mean, it's formatted in a way that it's obviously from them. I would not pay as much attention to it in that way if it was obviously coming from a staffing agency or coming from somebody else. But if it's something that they obviously put together themselves, and this is for everybody, if you have a resume that you put together yourself, that is not just typing stuff into the website, make sure it's perfect. If English is not your first language, have somebody whose English is their first language look at it. Because I mean, you may have people interviewing you where English is not their first language, and then they may not care.
Or make it look like it came from.
Right, or make it look like it came from a staffing agency.
And you know, off that, I look at resumes every single day. And a lot of times it's things that might, go unnoticed, where it's like part of your font is gray and part of it's black, so you're copying and pasting it. So it's a lot of those little things, and a lot of people in this day and age only have one resume that they put out for every single position that they have. So if that's going to be something that you choose to do and you don't edit it for every role, you just want to make sure that the content's correct, there's no spelling and grammar errors, those types of things. Because for me, if I see that it's all over it, that automatically gets declined, right? Even if you have all the experience, if every third bullet is, out of line, or there's all sorts of issues in it, you won't even make it to the manager.
Right.
Now there are a couple that get through, happen.
So sometimes your experience is better or is worth passing it on. But yeah, because again, software development requires you to be extremely detail oriented. You have to be able to find that bug and you have to know that that's supposed to be a plus and not a minus.
You missed something. A strong referral goes a long way.
That's true. A strong referral does go a long way.
So on that note, on the resume front, so for instance, if you are applying for different types of jobs, your recommendation would be to actually do a different resume for a different type of job, or try to do one resume for.
My recommendation would be, it depends on the role that you're hiring for and if there's enough information. So previously, prior to everybody going remote, a lot of people would, I wouldn't say edit their resumes and they're writing a whole new resume, but they're gonna read the job description and they're gonna highlight the experience that they actually have of what's listed there, right? Nowadays, it is, they have one blanket resume that has a little bit of information, which, you know, can work for some positions, but if it's a highly specialized role where they're specifically in the job description, have to have HL7 or